All right, meeting's recording now. Sharon, you can take over and start.
Excellent. We're going to kind of speed through this first part because we understand that some of us have hard stops, one at 9:30 and one at 10. So I'd like to call to order the meeting for the policy committee, Western Board of Ed policy meeting committee for Tuesday, June 3rd. I can't believe it already. The first item on the agenda is the approval of minutes. Lisa, Michael, did you have a chance to take a look at the minutes? And do you have any questions, or can we have a motion to approve them?
I make a motion to approve the minutes.
All right. Excellent. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Great. Let's move on. All right. So I think the first policy that we had up to discuss was visitors and observations. But I think, Tracy, if it's okay with you, unless that's the Shipman one, I think that Shipman starts at school security and safety, correct?
No, actually, Jessica is here for the first two policies, visitors and observations, and safety and security. And there's a specific reason why, which I can kind of set up if that would be helpful.
Take it away.
So the first policy is visitors and observations. This probably looks somewhat familiar to all of you because we recently, like within the last couple of years, adopted this policy, and it has been actively in use across the district. The only part of this policy that's changing is in response to updated requirements around immigration officials, which pertains to both the visitors and observation policy and the safety and security policy. And there is also some updated language in the visitor and observation policies about the requirement of visitors to follow any health and safety protocols that are in place at the time of their visit. So just if you're looking at the policy, the bottom, I guess midway through page 1, the paragraph that starts upon arrival, if you go toward the bottom, it says all visitors and observers permitted into school buildings. And then if you follow that through the end of page 2, that's the updated language. Pretty much everything else in the policy and regulation is remaining consistent, including the forms. Those are the forms that we're already using across district. It's just those two sections.
Okay. I have a quick question on that. And that was one of my questions. Where are these from? Where do the forms live so that parents have access to them?
The forms live on the website with our policy and regulation information. And I'll just share with you that whenever a parent reaches out to ask about observations, we provide them with a link to this information so that they can understand both the requirements. There's some timeline requirements, like how much notice the school needs, and they also have access to the documentation. And of course, if families have questions, we address those as they come up. I will say procedurally, the visitors and observations component of this policy and the forms have worked quite well for us for the last couple of years. I don't have any concerns about those.
Okay. All right. Michael, anything on this one?
I mean, I guess, I don't know if Jessica wanted to walk through sort of just the highlights where this is coming from. Is this state mandated? What are you doing with other, is this language that's going into policies of other districts? Just that sort of sense of line of questioning, Jessica, if you can just go into some of that.
Sure. And I'm just trying to find, I don't see the latest update that we had here, Tracy, in the event that a federal immigration official comes to the school in your visitors policy.
Yes, it's at the bottom of
Right.
page 1. It's the last paragraph starts in the event that a federal immigration official.
That's funny. I just am not seeing that in what was sent to me, but I must be missing it. But in any event,
I'm not seeing that.
I'm not seeing it either.
I don't see it either. What we see is in the middle of that paragraph, we see something along the lines of request for photo identification, reporting directly to and signing in and out of the visitors reception area, prominently displaying visitors badges. Are you seeing that one, Jessica?
Yeah, I see the regulations, but there was an addition to the policy that we had suggested that I just don't see in
Right,
here.
I'm not sure that it carried over under the changes as Tracy and Jody were updating it. Tracy, do you want to just read us what you have?
Yeah,
And
in
then
the
Jessica,
event, sorry.
Can you actually share your screen, Tracy? Is that possible?
I'm so old
Or
school.
not?
I'm looking at my
No.
own
Well, don't-
document. I'm really,
Gotcha.
Just read it. Yeah, we don't
Yeah.
want to waste too much time on,
and it's the same language as safety and security, if that's helpful. In the event that a federal immigration authority appears in person at a school in the district or otherwise contacts a school to request information, in accordance with applicable law and pursuant to the guidance to K-12 public schools pertaining to immigration activities developed by the Connecticut State Department of Education or any subsequent applicable CSDE guidance, such authority shall be directed to communicate with the administrator designated for such interactions, who will follow the protocols outlined in the school's security and safety plan. For purposes of this policy, a quote, federal immigration authority means quote, any officer, employee, or other person otherwise paid by or acting as an agent of the United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement or any successor agency thereto, or any division thereof, or any officer, employee, or other person otherwise paid by or acting as an agent of the United States Department of Homeland Security or any successor agency thereto, who is charged with enforcement of the civil provisions of the Immigration and Nationality Act.
that's a big one.
Yeah, and so Michael, I'll just get back to your question, which is a good one because obviously this language is very specific. So where it comes from, just to walk down, to give a little history. Initially, it used to be that schools were considered protected areas, meaning immigration officials couldn't just go into a school normally, except in unusual circumstances, and come in and do their work. That was repealed under the Trump administration. And as a result, initially, the Connecticut State Department of Education provided guidance to school districts in Connecticut about what they should do in the event that an immigration official showed up. And then later, in March, Governor Lamont signed into law a bill that directs school districts to take certain steps. And that bill says a number of things, but basically it directs superintendents to designate on or before April 1st, 2025, so I'm sure you've already done this, at least one administrator at each school to be responsible for interacting with federal immigration authorities who appear in person at school or contact the school to request information. The new law also directed boards of ed to update for the 24-25 school year, so that was really this year, and going forward, their school security and safety plans, which under existing law has to be, as I'm sure you know, developed for each school, with protocols for interacting with immigration authorities. So the policy that we're going to talk about next, which is the school security and safety plan, accounts for those very specific new requirements. And then relatedly, the addition that Tracy just read to the visitors and observations policy related to this references that plan and clarifies that in the event that a federal immigration authority appears in person at a school or otherwise contacts a school, that the immigration authority shall be directed to communicate with the administrator designated for those interactions, who will follow the protocols outlined in the school's security and safety plan. So those two policies work together. They all come from a state law. There's some optional language in the state law, which I noticed you're not proposing to adopt, but everything else is really pursuant to that law.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so this is new, Jessica, so this is new based on what the governor has done over the last, let's call it, few months. And so districts, there weren't any districts that had this language, is that, or similar language, is that correct, before the law
This is
was
brand new.
okay.
Yeah. Because schools, as as I mentioned before, this was never really an issue.
Yeah.
Because under the Department of Homeland Security's guidance, schools were considered to be protected areas. So we didn't generally have to be concerned about immigration officials showing up at your door. Or if we were concerned, we could just say, go away, this is a protected area. But because of what happened at the federal level, that triggered action at the state level in March. And then immediately we Shipman jumped into action, amended these policies, and that's what schools are adopting now. Or at least those who, I mean, every school has to make these changes and because it's not discretionary.
It's
Right.
not. Okay. Yeah. Right. Okay.
Okay. All right, so that's the first one. Lisa, do you have any other questions on that one?
No.
Well,
Should we-
yeah, and operationally, obviously the person designated at each building is the principal. And then operationally, the principals would notify the superintendent. And
Okay.
if necessary, if anything got confused, or confusing, we would consult with legal counsel at that point.
And is the assistant principal, or if the principal is not available, if the principal's not in the building?
Yeah,
is
it would be the assistant, sure.
Okay, all right. And
I just
go
want
ahead.
to, what was left out from the state recommendation that we didn't put in?
So I think you left out the, there are two pieces, and I think you can see it kind of in cross out in your packet. It's on page, it's on page 18 of your packet.
Oh,
You can see in red strike through, it says note to client, the following protocols are not required by state law, but they're included as recommendations in the CSDE's guidance to K-12 public schools, and it may be included. And it's direction that staff maintain a calm and cooperative manner to avoid escalating the situation, increasing anxiety among the staff and students, or being perceived as obstructing or interfering with any lawful activities, and direction that the designated administrator or other staff record details regarding the visit, any access the agents gained to information records, areas, or individuals, whether that access was granted, and if so, who granted such access.
thank you.
So this policy in particular, basically what it's saying is it's identifying what we do if, I shouldn't say when, because we have a pretty low population here, I think. But if Homeland Security shows up, it identifies what we do, but it doesn't specifically say, if they have the correct warrants and paper trail, are we then to grant them access to student information? Is that what this policy says? I'm trying to read it clearly and have an understanding.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't, it's a good point, Sharon, because it doesn't say that, right? If all these conditions are satisfied then, but that's the implication. And the implication is that it's important to confirm that the immigration authority is complying with all applicable laws before access is granted, documents are provided, etc. As a practical matter, it's a good idea to call your counsel if somebody shows up. And we actually have an immigration practice, and one of my colleagues works day in and day out on issues related to immigration. And so if somebody shows up, I do recommend that you reach out to us or whoever you're working with to get guidance and ensure that the laws are being followed.
Yeah, I saw a brief mention of reaching out for legal counsel, but Deb, how are we handling this with the building administrators? Clearly you said that they're to contact you, but I mean, are we bringing in legal counsel if something like this happens?
Well, we don't have a test or a first case yet.
Happy
But
about
yeah,
that.
our first inclination would be, to maintain the calm demeanor and all of that, but to just ask everybody's patience as we check out, the credentials, before granting any more access. So that
So-
would absolutely involve calling legal counsel.
Good. Good, good. All right. So do we want to leave the calm demeanor part in there? Or is that something we just don't want to necessarily have?
Yeah,
a
well,
Yeah,
I'm
why
always for
wouldn't we?
shorter, I'm always for shorter policies.
Yeah.
And I don't want an argument over what a calm demeanor looks like.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Fair enough. Okay. All right.
My last question here, maybe this segues into the next safety and security, which is what role, if any, does Jim serve in this sort of process himself as the director of security? Is Jim contacted by the superintendent when it gets elevated to that? Are the police automatically contacted? Sort of how does the director of security / law enforcement portion in this chain sort of get activated, or do they automatically get activated? I don't know.
That's a good question. And that would be something that, logically the instinct would be to notify the director of safety and security. At that point, again, without a test case, I can't promise this, but I would trust his judgment as to whether local law enforcement needs to get involved or not.
Jim, have you had any experience with? Maybe probably not, given the change. But have you had any experience with immigration officials when you were in Fairfield or in any other capacity?
Not with immigration, but I have worked with task force, statewide and federal task force. And typically what happens is because of the partnership they have with local law enforcement, they reach out to the chief of the local law enforcement, and this is all confidential, and say, hey, we're going to be doing this operation at 3 a.m. on this street. Can you send some marked cars over? So it's always a partnership. The immigration aspect of it, that's different. I have not, but I see it as, from a practical point of view, it's no different than if somebody goes up to the front door, hits our door chime, the security guard says, who are you? What are you here for? Then my phone rings. It's the same as that if DCF shows up. When DCF shows up at one of our elementary schools, I get notified, hey, DCF is here. Okay, do you have an appointment? Who are you here to see? They're all vetted outside of the building before that buzzer is activated to let them gain access.
Good.
Just to break it down kind of, procedurally, that's how it would happen, whether it's a DCF social worker or an ICE enforcement officer. That's our first barrier, that doorbell has to ring, and they are vetted by the security staff before anyone gains access to the school. And if it was an ICE enforcement officer, that would be a meeting outside of the school in the parking lot, and then check the judicial warrant versus administrative warrant and go through that whole process. And this is all fluid. So while I'm doing that, or my security staff is doing that, the super or an administrator could be on the phone with counsel saying this is all happening at the same time. It's all a fluid, it's not step A, step B, step C, you know what I mean? Like, it all happens all at once.
Right. There are multiple processes happening in parallel here. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
Just
That's a better way to put it.
Just to clarify though, Jim, if they buzz on the door and they identify who they are, will the security guard then exit the building and stand outside to talk to them? Because once we grant them entry, once we buzz them in, doesn't that give them access?
They shouldn't be buzzing them in, and it depends on what school it is. If the guard is by himself, he's not going to leave his post. He'll call me.
Okay.
And then I would call the mile of safety officer who's rolling around and say, hey, meet me up at
Whatever. Yeah. Okay.
ICE is there. And at the same, again, fluid, call Captain Michelli. This is what we got going on. And I'm sure the chief would be here in 90 seconds.
Do we need to have any sort of verbiage in this policy about the fact that the meeting needs to take place on the exterior of the school? Because once they're inside, again, I think that is legally granting them entry. Jessica, help me out with this one. Am I reading into it too much, or?
I would stick with what's required under the law and not make changes. The language tracks the law and the CSTE guidance. But it's good that you're all discussing what the protocol would be.
But if they get buzzed in, like the guy says, I'm here, I'm da-da-da-da, and like come inside and show me your identification, that's them being buzzed in. Does that give them access to the building?
No.
Okay.
I would say no, but
okay.
you should all discuss just as a practical matter, how you're going to handle this.
Right.
So, I mean, I think it's better to your point, to do all of this, all of these checks outside the building. And but I think that I'm just looking, I think if you buzz them in and don't, leave them in a common area, right? Like I'm thinking about if you buzz parents in, they're not automatically sent. They have to come to the office before they go to a classroom, right?
Well, they have the desk there where they get their ID scanned and
Right.
everything like that. Yeah.
Right. So I wouldn't give them access beyond that if you buzz them in. Part of the question I would have is whether there's a security issue with having this conversation outside.
Right.
I don't know, right? And or the optics and what kind of tumult is going to be created by having this interaction outside. I don't know how many ICE agents there would be and who would be around, but I think these are important questions to think through, but I would not modify the language of the policy because it tracks the law and the guidance.
Okay.
Right.
So this is just more of a soft policy for Jim to enact, perhaps with the security guards.
Well, and
Right.
also remember the principal is also there. So
Sure.
if the security guard, it's not appropriate for the security guard to leave, the principal
Right.
can meet the office either at the desk in the security area or outside. And again, we can think about that.
Okay.
I don't know how many officers, if it were to come to this, I don't know how many officers show up or need access. I just don't know.
Yeah. None of us know either, but I guess maybe, Michael, this might be better handled in the security committee where you guys have your discussions about that then. So long as the policy is tracking what the state recommends, I think that we're safe that way.
Yes.
Okay. All right. I don't want to take us off track. Again, Jessica, we have 5 minutes left of your time.
So just to be clear about this visitors policy, we'd be proposing replaces the old visitors and observations policy. Obviously, it needs to go through both reads. Safety and security, we can start with Jessica. This was a very outdated policy, and it came up because the language around immigration officials is found both in the visitor and observation policy and the safety and security policy, which is part of the reason why we're bringing it up for review. We are going to need to repeal the old policy just so this committee has a sense of what needs to happen next and adopt this new policy. Jessica, I don't know if you wanted to talk any more about the language in this policy around immigration officials, hoping that you have the correct copy of this one. It begins in the third paragraph, starting for the school year commencing July 1, 2024.
Right. So it really, what I said before about the legal requirements and the history there with the CSDE guidance and the new state law, that really is designed to impact this policy. The visitors policy was almost the tag along. So everything I said is what this policy encompasses. And it tracks the requirements of the law. As I said before, there's just 2 discretionary pieces, which you have understandably opted not to include.
Okay.
So are there any other questions for Jessica? There's obviously other elements of this policy, but I think this was the only part that we thought council might be helpful for.
Who ultimately is responsible for granting approval for the entry? Is it superintendent or is it a building administrator? And do we need to clarify that?
Are you saying entry into the building or providing them with the information that they're requesting?
Both, actually. That's good. Good point.
I mean, really, it's the designated administrator, whoever that is.
Okay. So they don't have to get in touch with the super in order to give permission.
Right.
So
Okay.
it's the principal. Effectively, it's the principal. of the school.
Although I would say, and this is a policy meeting, not a procedure meeting, the procedure is, the internal procedure is that the principal is notifying the superintendent. So in my mind, while not outlined specifically in the policy, because I don't think we want to get in the weeds that much, it would be the expectation that that principal is in communication with the superintendent and they are making decisions in tandem with the involvement of council as necessary.
It ultimately, as I understand, just sets off a chain of events here, right? They arrive, it sets off a chain of events. There are gyms being contacted, the superintendent's being contacted, council's being contacted, the police are notified. So all of these things are happening simultaneously, right, upon arrival. And then, a determination is made, with input from all of these people, all these representatives, and then eventually, if it's deemed appropriate, then the principal is the one, the designee is the one to grant access. I assume is sort of how it would work, just generally speaking, without getting into the weeds.
Yeah, they're in the buildings. That makes the most sense.
Yeah, all right, so I'm just reading, it's on page 18C. That's where I was reading the paragraph and I was kind of just trying to clarify, but.
Just my last question for you is just it piggybacks on something that Sharon said before, which is a very good question, which is just because you grant them or anyone else access doesn't mean that they have carte blanche, right? They have the ability to access to go directly to a classroom or automatically access records. You're just granting them access, let's say the annex or whatever have you, and then you're going through the processes here in the district in order to determine whether or not they have approval to either, visit a classroom, or gain access to any appropriate records, right? There's no implicit access or approval that you're providing if you were to conduct the, I don't know what you would call it, investigation / process within, let's say, the common area of the school.
Right. So my understanding of it, and I will be candid, I am not an immigration attorney. So so I'll just say this is my general understanding. If there are more specific questions, I'd want to connect us with our immigration attorney. My understanding is that there is a warrant that spells out what that person is authorized to do and, what access they are, authorized to have. And it's not just carte blanche to go searching through every school district file to search for people who may be here illegally. That's my understanding. And that's why it's really important to examine the warrant, to understand it, to understand the scope, et cetera. And in terms of implicitly granting access, I mean, the chain of events that's set off will include, like, let's understand whether this warrant is valid, what it says, what information you're allowed to provide, and certainly FERPA, right, is a really important component of this. You have to make sure that you're protecting FERPA information unless the immigration authority is authorized to gain access to certain FERPA protected information. So in short, yes, part of this exercise is to ensure that the scope is limited and that you're complying with that limited scope. Kind of like any warrant, right?
And if we have, I'm looking at the time, so Jessica, I know is open to more questions via email, and those could be forwarded if need be to your immigration expert. But we do need to let you go, Jessica. So thank you.
Well, I was late, so you can keep me for another couple minutes if you have any more questions. But Debbie, your point is fair that if there are more specific immigration related questions, I may want to forward those along.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Jessica.
Thank you so much, Jessica.
Take care,
We appreciate it.
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right, see you later. I do have one other question procedurally, which is on page 19 with the 2-year assessment. Jim, I'm assuming that's you, correct? Who would initiate the 2-year assessment for the safety and security?
I don't have a page 19.
Um,
I didn't either.
It's
it's page
it's
19.
under
Yeah,
section 4 of the
Oh,
safety and security
yeah.
section.
Yes.
Thanks, Michael. All right, so that's you who's initiating, because I was like, we just want to make sure that, who initiates this, and that would be a natural for you. So,
So
okay.
on paper, the 2 year is kind of like a state standard. It is the state standard. The assessment is done. But as you are aware, Mike, my assessments happen every single day. It's ongoing.
Okay.
So that is something that we turn into the state. Where we
Okay.
go all hazards plan and do all those updates.
Yeah,
Excellent.
it's a good question. Just Jim, I know you do this, but this is a more formalized sort of assessment, right? In terms of what
Yes.
you're submitting to the state. So you require, and look, I know you're doing your personal, your professional assessments every day and then conducting it on an annual basis as well. And then every 2 years you're required formally to provide the assessment to the state. Is that correct?
Yes, it's just a checklist.
Okay.
You have security guards. Are they armed? Are they not armed?
Yeah.
Access
Okay.
controls. Do you have cameras? It's a checklist, basically. Not a heavy lift.
This
Excellent.
this training portion, which is right before that, section 3, is that annual? I may have overlooked it. This training and orientation, does that happen on an annual basis, Jim? I don't know that it says that it gives a time frame.
You're talking about section 3 of an orientation to the safety and security plan. Is that where you are?
Yes. Yeah. Right above the assessment section, right? So, which is section 4. So section 3 is training and orientation for school employees. Each school employee at the school shall receive an orientation, including school-specific annexes, relevant to the employee, et cetera, et cetera. That one.
Right. Once the board approves updated policies, any changes that go in hand with that or are new because of it, all the necessary staff will be trained. Anybody new to the district, of course, gets an orientation, some sort of onboarding procedures and all of that. So it's as needed, as required by any updates and or always with orientation. And then there are some sort of mandated or good to have refreshers. We just did one on, I don't know, it used to be AIDS. This last time was sex trafficking. So there are certain sort of mandatory staff trainings that happen, and we keep up with that schedule.
Okay. No. Thanks. I've spoken to Jim about this before too, right? It's our ability to make sure we're creating a standard here that we can sort of adhere to, so everyone understands that we obviously take it seriously, we're being proactive, and then every year we are doing X, Y, and Z that we're saying we're doing, just to make sure that, to your point, Debbie, that all the staff, whether they're existing or new, they're constantly refreshed, updated, oriented to the safety and security standards of the district. So that's good to hear. Okay, thanks.
Okay, any other questions? No? Should we move on to the next one? I think we are on, what is it? Drug and alcohol use by students, or did I skip one?
No, that's it.
Oh, that's correct.
All right, and I would have thought that was Jessica. Tracy, have you been working on this with her, or who's been working on this with her?
Yes, I've been working on this, and I should be able to address your questions, or I hope I can address your questions.
I'm sure you will.
We're in a little bit of an interesting situation. I just want to give you some context. So we currently have regulations without a policy, which I'm not entirely sure how we got there, but that's where we are at this moment. And typically we have a policy and then we decide whether or not we want regulations. In addition to that, the drug and alcohol policy has been revised, like the Shipman version has been revised since our last set of regulations. So what's going to need to happen with this particular policy is we're going to need to repeal the current administrative regulation that's in place if we move forward, and the board would then adopt this policy in its place. Again, this is the most up-to-date version of the drug and alcohol policy by Shipman. It's based on the most current legislative updates in Connecticut. The only thing we've done to this policy is add the district name to it. I think there's a lot of interest in moving from the regulation to this policy, because the regulations were extremely prescriptive and, quite frankly, at this point now in conflict with some of our other policies, meaning that the regulations were not fitting some of the circumstances that we were seeing on the building level. And we've gotten feedback that it would be helpful from the administrators, that it would be helpful to have more of a range of responses around some of these concerns. I do want to underscore that this new policy is incredibly clear that any sort of criminal behavior is completely unacceptable on campus. It needs to be addressed promptly and seriously. We do not tolerate things like possession or selling. And at the same time, there are other more minor and nuanced events that need some administrator discretion around what's an educational opportunity, where and how can we provide support to a student, et cetera. So that's generally where we are with this policy and the regulations, but I'm happy to talk through more specific information or to go through this in more detail if that's helpful.
I've got one big question, and I know that this sounds crazy, but since nicotine is actually a controlled substance until 18, should that be included in this policy? I hate to be like that person, Karen, but I mean, nicotine is a pretty horrible thing for the kids to utilize, and I don't know, how are we handling that?
I'm honestly just rereading the definition of controlled substances and drugs. You're saying it's not reflected in there?
I didn't see it. It had like, alcohol, marijuana, cannabis, and psychedelics and things like that, but nowhere did it mention anything about nicotine.
I'm happy to look at
Yes,
the statute, which I don't have committed to memory, but the language here is anything that's been designated as having a stimulant, depressant, or hallucinogenic effect upon the higher function of the central nervous system and as having a tendency to promote abuse or psychological or any sort of dependence. So based on my read of that, I would be including that there, but I am happy to get clarification to make sure that that is also part of that definition.
I would love to get some clarification on that and find out whether or not we should be specifically naming nicotine, just like they specifically name cannabis and alcohol. Just because it is a problem, in my opinion. I don't know. I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to cause problems where there are none, but I think that, having gone through Portrait of a Graduate and having one of the kids tell me about how he had broken an addiction to nicotine as one of the things that he had overcome, that's kind of scary, right? So, and if they're not able to legally buy it until they're 18 years old, then maybe we need to treat it as a controlled substance on campus. Am I alone on this one? Might be. Okay, never mind.
No, I think it's no. I mean, we should explore, right?
Explore, find out what Shipman thinks.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm also not looking to send anybody to jail, but at the same time, I would like to.
Let's check with Jessica on that.
Yeah.
Sharon, to your point, it's probably in the reaction to what we do about it versus how serious it is, to someone's health. And there may be a distinction between what we traditionally up till now have considered controlled substances as really a criminal act,
Right.
Versus nicotine, which, yes, it shouldn't be possessed by minors, but would it have the same disciplinary repercussions that some other substances might. So I think
Fair
that's an important question. And that would need clarification from Jessica too.
Okay.
All
Yeah,
right,
I'd love to get
I'm not trying to say that it wouldn't be serious and we don't do things about it in response, but there are typically harsher responses around what we have traditionally considered controlled substances versus cigarettes.
Fair enough.
Just to be
Absolutely.
straightforward.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep. No, that's totally fair. Okay. That was one for me. Anybody, Michael, Lisa, do you guys have anything or?
I have maybe I don't know. I have a bunch of questions about so there was language in here about, of course, a student sort of almost turning themselves in, for example. But there was language about someone else. I don't want to say telling is just not the appropriate word, but informing about another student's, violation of the drug and alcohol policy here. What do you do in that case in terms of, what's reasonable suspicion? What allows you to search them? What do you do in the case of an unsubstantiated claim? So there are all those questions around. I don't know. Maybe I'm thinking of a tail case, which is, I don't know, someone has it out for someone else. They make an unsubstantiated claim. What are the steps there? I mean, does that automatically open someone up to, do you have to satisfy some reasonable suspicion before you go, pulling someone in and searching them? Is it observations? Like, I have no idea. That whole sort of area of questioning, I'm curious about, Tracy.
So if you look at, you're talking about number 4
Yeah.
within the policy, there are steps that need to be followed when and if that happens. So the first is there's a reporting requirement for the employee who has obtained that information. There's information here about physical evidence. I think your whole point about like search and seizure, the
Yeah.
professional employee needs to, quote, reasonably suspect, and we can talk for a long time about what reasonably suspect means, but there needs to be some indication that this is a concern. We can't just complete a search without any grounds to do so. Could we debate on what's reasonable and what's not? Probably. But there needs to be some information to guide that process.
Yeah, I don't want to get down that rabbit hole because we could talk about that for hours and end up nowhere. But is it erratic and abnormal behavior? Is it visible? You actually see something yourself, or there's corroborating. There's another person who corroborates that claim, for example. Those are my questions. Not that we have to answer them here, but.
Right. Well, all of those are possible and would be considered. Yes. The answer,
Okay.
do you look at somebody's behavior? Absolutely. Is it the third person in a row who's told you the same thing? Then
Yeah.
something, yeah. So all of those come into play. And that's why the administrator's training, just needs and experience and understanding and needs to come into play.
Mike, to answer your totality of circumstances leads someone to reasonable suspicion.
Okay.
Multiple layer.
Oh, I like that phrase, totality of
Circumstances.
totality of
That's good.
experience, is that it? I love it.
Totality of circumstances.
Circumstances.
I have a
Great
question.
line.
I have a question regarding the searches in particular. It mentions that the school, if there's reasonable, suspicion, the school has the right to search the students, possessions. How does that translate to their car? Does the school have the right to search a student's car, or do we have to call the police department in to have that actually happen?
Jim, do you want to weigh in on that? Do you know?
Well, it's school property. That's a gray area for me because my police mindset is no, not without reasonable suspicion. Can't get in the trunk. But, you know, again, it's very incident specific. So if you search a juvenile's backpack in the school and he has 20 glassine bags that are known, in my experience, to contain drugs for sale, yeah, that raises the level to get into that person's car. But that's a gray area for, I don't have an answer for, as far as administrators go, if they can get into a car. I would think yes, because it's school property.
Right.
I know they can get in the lockers and they can get in students' backpacks
Yeah, but
under
yeah,
reasonable suspicion.
right, right. And all of it under reasonable suspicion. I just didn't know where the car, when the car became fair play, I guess I should say.
And that would lead the you know, whoever's investigating, the administrator, if the investigation leads, let's just use an example. A juvenile shows up at high school and he's intoxicated. And where did you drink? You know, it's the line of questioning, and that comes from the training of the staff on how they question. You know, I have it in my car. Well, there you go. He just gained access to the car to search the car, and he
Okay.
found a bottle in the car. So it's hard to give hard answers on this policy, because it all is very incident specific on where that line of questioning leads the investigation, what road it goes down.
All right, but the
That
school
makes
does
sense.
ultimately, if there is reasonable suspicion that, you know, like you said, you find a variety of bags and that you think there's a distribution issue going on, the school
Yes.
does have the right then to search a student's car because it's on school property.
I would think so. Tracy, is there a policy on school property and vehicles? I don't know that answer.
Okay,
I know the staff have a lot more leeway than the police. There are certain
Right.
criteria, certain thresholds that we have to, I'm retired, but it's hard to take that hat off sometimes. There are much higher obstacles and thresholds that the police have to meet meet reasonable suspicion, probable cause, than the staff do on school property. They have a lot more leeway in searching.
okay.
Yeah, I mean, you're right that the staff can more easily get into a locker, get into a backpack than the police officers can. Let's ask Jessica about the car on student property. I don't want to give a definitive answer and have it be wrong.
Okay, fair.
This is going before the full board. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes, but I can get answers before that happens.
It's fine. I had two other questions, but but I'm gonna have to sign out in 10 minutes. My only other questions, maybe we don't just answer them here. Just you know, I'm curious if there's a search. Let's say, you know, I'll take Jim's example. You know, someone is, I don't know, someone comes in intoxicated. Okay, so you search for that, and then you find something else. Right now, you're finding, let's say, I don't know, drugs or something. I don't know. I guess, what is that? Do you have to be searching for a specific thing in, you know, through someone's personal belongings? What if you find something
No.
else?
Yeah. Once you have, again, reasonable
Once you have
suspicion,
access.
and you get in the backpack and you go, oops, I thought it was going to be marijuana, but it's something else. No, you
Yeah.
have access to
Okay.
the backpack.
Okay. And then the final question is just, there was language in here, use off school grounds. And then I guess there was language or some verbiage around sort of, you know, was it going to be, is it far enough? Is it disruptive? There's a determination there. Tracy, can you unpack that a little bit for me? Just, I don't know how those determinations are made, and, you know, I don't know.
Yeah, so you're talking about section 5, part B. And it talks about that students may be suspended or expelled for drug or alcohol use off school grounds if such drug or alcohol use is considered seriously disruptive of the educational process. So
Yeah.
this is not the only place that we see that language, just so you know, that appears in other policies. And the
Okay.
factors that the administration and the board, quote, may consider, and it's among other factors, are whether the drug or alcohol use occurred within close proximity of the school, whether other students from the school were involved, and whether any injuries occurred. So this would be part of the administrative investigation. And I think what you're getting at, Michael, is yes, there is some discretion from the administrators based on this language. Close proximity of school that's not, clear. It's not like if it's within 500 yards, that's different than if it's
Right.
2 miles. Whether other students from school were involved. Is this one other student came over on a Saturday, or were there 80 seniors involved in some sort of event that was talked about in school? Were there repercussions in terms of social engagement when they came back to school on Monday morning? Like it's the weight and gravity of the surrounding events that the administration would take into account when thinking about that kind of the level of discipline imposed for such an incident.
Okay, I don't want to muck us up here. I read that language and I was like, ooh, there's a lot of discretion here that's involved. And so
Yeah,
again,
and yeah,
something
Michael, that's
for
probably one of
discussion.
the, off-campus behavior is one of the toughest things to determine to what extent it disrupts the educational process and to what extent it is seriously disruptive of the educational process. So you have to sit down, and again, it's usually not an administrator working in isolation. He or
Yeah.
she usually, is working with other colleagues as well and looking at, what was that phrase, the totality of circumstances? And I don't mean to just, sort of throw that out, but it's really important.
Yeah.
Just how private is this, or was it, how much talk and, upheaval is there? And then again, for some off-campus behavior, I know that, they are more clearly covered in some of the athletic participation policies or procedures. If you break your training rules, or, if that is, and that's clearly, upfront. It is not taking away a student's right to an education. It is taking away the privilege to participate in athletics. So that has been the sort of rationale before, is that, being on a team's a privilege. And if you, are found to have been drinking on the weekend, then you can be suspended from your team. That is sort of the most clear-cut and procedure about off-campus behavior. The rest really hinges on that disruption to the educational process. And there are lots of ways to look at that and lots of arguments. Yeah, it's really about the circumstances there. It can only be that.
Okay. Thanks, Deb. Thanks, Tracy.
Excellent. All right, any other questions on this one? I know we only have 4 minutes of your time left, Michael, but I know that Deb, you wanted to get into, I'm sorry, what was the last, hold on, got to scroll all the way down here. So I can, the student code of conduct, there we go.
Right, and this is an FYI. Regulations typically don't officially need Board of Ed approval, but this represents a change, or an addition, not a change, but an addition to the format that we have been using, which is listing the consequences within each policy, attached as regulations. So, given the spate of unfortunate behaviors we've had around the swastika incidences, a common question from parents was, well, what happens? And how do I know what happens? Those kinds of questions. And of course, that bumps into individual student records and all of that. But if parents in general want to know, okay, what happens if I or my kid or my kid's friend has done X, Y, or Z, we figured, and we are basically copying this from something Westport did several years ago, is they took the consequences for different kinds of infractions based on multiple policies. And instead of only leaving it in regulation language, they put it into chart form.
I
So
like that.
that's what we're attempting to do here, is to put it into chart form. We are starting just with grades 6 through 12, and then distinguishing between middle and high school, and putting the infraction, then putting the consequence. And again, you'll notice there's a range, and sometimes there's a distinction between the first offense or subsequent offenses. And then in this day and age, it's important to understand that we always want to take advantage of any educational opportunity in addition to disciplinary, not in place of, in addition to,
Mhm.
you know, in concert with, in partnership with. So that's why both are listed there. So if someone does X and a parent wants to know, we're hoping that this chart is somewhat easier to follow and navigate. So that's what we're attempting to do. And again, it's kind of based off of something that Westport did several years ago. I think Wilton has copied it a little bit as well. We are trying to condense it, you know, to kind of not be as long as Westport's was. So, you know, we're consolidating and we're limiting it to 6, 8, and 9, 12, at least as a start. And then, you know, understanding that the introduction is important, you know, the student's background, the situation, the totality of the circumstances is going to become my new favorite phrase, but all of that goes into figuring it. But, you know, parents can trust that these are, after the investigation, these are the consequences if the behavior is confirmed. So that's what we're trying to do. It doesn't get at the what happened to Johnny and why didn't you do more? It doesn't get at that question, but at least it gets at the, so what are you going to do about it?
I think that this is really important. I actually had quite a few conversations over Memorial Day weekend with parents at the fair in which they were asking questions about, you know, consequences and things like that. And I actually jokingly said, we need a rubric.
Oh.
We need. So
I-
thank you. You've created a rubric.
All right, well,
I'd like just to put on the record that I understand there are consequences, but when a child has poor behavior, it's a cry for help. And I think we should, you know, where social and emotional learning becomes so important, we should think about behavioral intervention plans as a consequence of poor conduct instead of suspension. I don't know if suspension may be politically correct, but I don't think it supports a student. More so, you have restorative justice, maybe for a first time offense, but a behavioral intervention plan after that. The guidance department becomes really important because we want to change that behavior. And in order to change that behavior, we have to implement a plan to change the behavior or to reach a specific goal. And I think that's really important. You might want to consider that in this time where social and emotional learning are more important than the consequences. You know, one of the consequences for a student missing detention was that he has to go to detention. You know, if they miss detention, there should be a plan in place in order to change those behaviors. Same thing with a student being late. You're going to suspend a student being late. Oh, that's great. He doesn't come to school anyway. We have to change those behaviors. In order to change those behaviors, we might want to put a behavioral intervention plan in rather than a consequence for those behaviors.
I think those are great points, Lisa, and that's why this is in draft form. And our administrative team is going to be going over it tomorrow. This is what we currently do, or what, and to some extent, what Westport currently does. Some of the examples you gave are relevant and germane, and maybe you know, we absolutely do need to consider them. There are other places that, again, we go often back to it needs to be both. Not that one is necessarily more important than the other, but that we need to work on both sides of the coin. That there are some consequences, and we realize, we're educators, and we realize these are young people, and ultimately the most and more important thing is, what did you learn from it? But that doesn't mean that there can't also, and in many cases shouldn't also, be consequences. So we're not trying to say it's one or the other. We're trying to say usually it's both. But to your point on first offenses and relative, and that whole thing about school avoidance, those are types of issues that absolutely, as we crawl through this chart some more, that we will need to consider. I think those are good points you raised.
I agree. Okay, anything else? Michael, we've lost Michael, but Lisa, do you have any other questions on the new rubric, which I love? All right, I think that's it. Next we go to Microscribe. Is that right, Jody?
Yes, just wanted to give you a really quick update on that. We're moving forward with it. Purchase order has been put in. I'm waiting for that. I've downloaded all the policies that are currently on our website right now. Once we send the check over to Microscribe and get them up and running, I'm going to send everything over to them and they're going to start working. It will not be live until sometime during the summer, but I just want to let you know we're moving forward with it.
Okay. No, I'm glad that's going to be great. It's going to be a wonderful resource, considering all the time that we put into this committee and all the policies that the details, and parents, when they want to know.
I think it'll be helpful for parents and for administrators.
Yeah, fabulous. Okay. I don't think we have any new business to talk about since we're going into our summer recess after this. So I think looking at the agenda, let's see.
I have the proposed calendar. Michael had some questions about it.
Uh-oh.
Our November our November meeting does fall on Election Day, which we are here. Students are not. You could keep it that day. You could move it. In the past, when we've tried to move it, we've moved it to the following week, but unfortunately that Tuesday now will conflict with safety and security.
I'm actually fine keeping it on Election Day, if that's okay with everyone else. I mean, voting doesn't take that long.
Okay. The other one actually that he caught and I didn't, with the April 7th, I realized it's our April recess is early next year. It conflicts with that. So I could move, again, I can't move it to the Tuesday of the following week, but we could move it to Monday of the following week if you want it, which would make it April 13th.
That could be tricky though, because a lot of people, April 13th. Oh, no, never mind. I don't have kids in school next year. And neither does Lisa. Michael might be the only one who has a conflict on that one, because sometimes people come back from their vacations.
Sometimes people come back.
Although, is it a let me take a look at, is it a virtual or is it in person, April?
Oh, we're all virtual.
Oh, we're all virtual.
Yeah,
yes,
we're all
never mind.
virtual on our
Monday
committee.
after, virtual.
Yep.
Absolutely fine.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Okay, so I'll just make that one change and then we're good for that. So
Yes.
based on that, if the schedule is okay, our first meeting is going to be September 2nd of next year.
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
All right. That sounds good to me. Okay. So, do we need to pass that, or are we just good?
No, it was just, we don't need to do that. As long as you're good with it, that's going to be your schedule. And we're very fluid with this, so we can change our meetings if we need to at any point in time, as long as I have a little notice. So we're good with that.
Okay. Sounds good to me. All right. So I think the only thing we need now is, Lisa, do you want to make a motion to adjourn? Sorry, before I do that, anyone else, any other comments on anything? All right, Lisa.
Thank you all. Have a great day. Let's make a motion to adjourn.
And I'll second it or whatever. Thank you everyone for a great year of policymaking, and we'll see you back in the fall. And Lisa, Deb, I'm going to see you today at 12:30.
Okay. All right, great. All
Anyway,
right.
thank you, everyone.
everybody.
Have a
Bye.
great summer.
Bye.
All right, bye-bye.